Before NASA figured out how to land astronauts on a runway, they had to answer one very uncomfortable question. Do you come home as a glider or as a brick? And to find out, NASA spent the early 1960s drag racing a plywood spaceship behind a Pontiac convertible, while other test pilots flew a collapsible kite that handled like a wet noodle. This is the story of NASA's strangest odd couple, the NASA M2F1 and the Paresev, and how a flying bathtub and a glorified hang glider quietly changed the future of spaceflight. I'm Bill, and this is Buffalo Air Park. Let's dive in. When most people picture NASA in the early 1960s, they imagine gleaming silver rockets, crisp white flight suits, and rooms full of engineers with buzz cuts and clipboards. But buried beneath all that polish was a very different reality. For a brief, glorious moment, NASA was operating like a garage startup, run by hot rodders, sailplane builders, and test pilots who were more than willing to say, "Yeah, I tried that." And nowhere was that spirit more obvious than at Edwards Air Force Base, where two radically different ideas were fighting over how astronauts should come home. First up, the Paresev, short for Paraglider Research Vehicle. On paper, it sounded elegant. NASA was obsessed with the Rogallo wing, a flexible, fold-up kite that could deploy after re-entry and let a capsule glide gently to a runway instead of splashing down in the ocean like a wet rat. In reality, it looked like a jungle gym strapped to a hang glider. Two pilots, Milt Thompson and Neil Armstrong, were so convinced this idea deserved testing that they basically went rogue. When the center director, Paul Bickel, initially said no, they started building this thing themselves in a hangar, using chalk lines on the floor instead of blueprints. Eventually, Bickel relented, probably to stop them from killing themselves in an unauthorized science project. The result was a 7-week, under $5,000 contraption with no engine, no cockpit, and a pilot sitting out in open air. Milt Thompson, who flew the X-15 rocket plane, later said flying the Paresev was like trying to control a wet noodle. And that wasn't a joke. The control forces were so heavy on one flight, Thompson had to wrap his legs around the control stick just to wrestle it onto a lakebed. The Paresev didn't just fly badly, it actively tried to kill its pilots. In one incident, Neil Armstrong was flying the tow plane while Thompson was behind him in the Paresev. Thompson radioed, asking Armstrong to speed up. Armstrong thought he meant turn faster. The tow plane went one way, the Paresev went the other. The rope went slack, and Thompson dropped straight into the sagebrush. Another pilot, Bruce Peterson, crashed the Paresev from just 10 feet in the air and smashed the nose clean off. Someone even had the bright idea to strap a smoke bomb to the frame so ground cameras could track it. Instead, the smoke got stuck directly into the cockpit. So picture this, a test pilot, flying blind, choking on orange smoke, in a vehicle that already handled like boiled spaghetti. NASA eventually got the message. The paraglider was clever, but fragile, unpredictable, and deeply unpopular with the people who had to fly it. Gemini went back to parachutes and water landings. The wet noodle was done. At the exact same flight center, another team was asking a completely different question. What if you didn't need wings at all? Enter the NASA M2F1, better known as the Flying Bathtub. It was a lifting body, a blunt half-cone shaped that generated lift just by moving fast enough. Skeptics thought it would fall out of the sky like a brick, until engineer Dale Reed built a balsa wood model, threw it off a roof, and watched it glide. That was enough to greenlight a full-scale version. But don't picture Boeing or Lockheed. NASA hired a local sailplane builder named Gus Breglib, assisted by craftsman Ernie Lauder, one of the men who built Howard Hughes' Spruce Goose. They constructed it out of mahogany plywood, boat material. In a curtained-off corner of a hangar, they spray-painted with a sign that read, Wright's Bicycle Shop. Total cost? About $30,000. NASA headquarters didn't even officially know it existed at first. Here's where things get incredible. The M2F1 had no engine, so to get it airborne, they needed a tow vehicle. Not a plane, a car. They sent hot rodder Walter Whiteside to buy a 1963 Pontiac Catalina convertible. Then they took it to a racing shop, tuned the engine, added a roll bar, installed racing slicks, and even turned the passenger seat around so an observer could watch the glider. This government-issued hot rod then drag raced across the Mojave at 110 miles per hour, towing a plywood spaceship. Whenever VIPs from Washington showed up, they hid the car under a tarp, because explaining that would have been awkward. Before flight testing, they put the M2F1 in a wind tunnel. Normally, you'd use a scale model. They didn't have one, so they put a human being in the cockpit for 8 hours, strapped into a plywood shell, bolted to stilts, while 135-mile-an-hour air blast past him, acting as a living servo motor. Milt Thompson loved it so much, he asked if he could try flying it on a tether inside the tunnel. The engineer said no. For once, sanity prevailed. Unlike the Paresev, the Flying Bathtub actually worked. Even Chuck Yeager climbed into it. After landing, he climbed out and shouted, "She handles great." Then he asked if he could barrel roll it. The engineers begged him not to. Years later, another pilot accidentally rolled it upside down on the tow line and landed safely. Twice. That was enough. The wooden bathtub was grounded, but its legacy wasn't. The lifting body concept evolved into metal successors like the M2F2, one of which famously crashed with Bruce Peterson at the controls. That footage? It became the opening credits of The $6 Million Man. Every week, millions of kids, including myself, watched a real NASA test pilot crash, while a narrator promised, "We can rebuild him." And in real life, they did. Peterson flew again. And the data from these strange little gliders, both the failures and the successes, fed directly into the design of the Space Shuttle. The unofficial motto of the lifting body team said it best: "Don't be rescued from outer space. Fly back in style." So while rockets grabbed the headlines and capsules splashed into the ocean, NASA's weirdest machines, flying bathtubs, wet noodles, and Pontiac-towed spaceships, quietly solved one of spaceflight's hardest problems. And they did it with plywood, smoke bombs, and a whole lot of guts. And that wraps up another tale from Aviation's stranger side. Until next time, keep your eyes on the skies.